As we begin this morning, we're looking at Genesis 39. We'll be looking at verses 3 and 4. And we're looking at the sovereignty of God and studying all the various doctrines that deal with the sovereignty of God. And what does sovereignty mean? Anybody know? All right. It's the fact that God is the ruler, the supreme ruler over all. Being sovereign means he's the supreme ruler. Okay? And he is in charge of everything. Because he made it, he created it, he's in charge of it. And thank God for that, because what would happen if we were in charge? I think it'd all be blowed up by now. Okay? If we were in charge, it'd be cold here and hot there. It'd be winter somewhere, it'd be summer somewhere else. It'd be all mixed up. And I think the world would probably blow up if we were in charge. But thank God, God's in control and has everything set according to his mercy. Today we're going to look at the sovereignty of God and how that God exerts upon the wicked a softening influence. A softening influence. And what that does, it disposes them to do something contrary to their nature. And that is to do that which God would have them to do. So look at Genesis chapter 39. And first, let's look at Joseph in verses 3 and 4. Genesis 39, verses 3 and 4. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. So I want you to see Potiphar here, who was an Egyptian, and he was the owner of Joseph. You think about that. This man was his master. This man had bought him from the slavery market that he had been placed in by his brothers, the slavers. All right, now here's Joseph, and notice what Potiphar sees in him. He says, and his master saw that the Lord was with him. The Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house. Now think about that, to be promoted from just a brand new slave to over his whole house. Well, that's not natural for a slave, is it? No. It would take many, many years for a slave to achieve that position. But Potiphar saw in Joseph something different. And Potiphar found kindness towards Joseph that was unusual for an Egyptian to have kindness toward a Jew. And then I want you to look over at same chapter, look down to verse number 21. Now remember, verse 20 says, and Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in prison. Now that doesn't sound very good, does it? Joseph has been arrested under false accusation. Remember, his wife had desired him, and he fled from her, and she ripped his garments and then claimed that he tried to take advantage of her. All right, so Potiphar puts him in prison. Okay, now think about it. How would you normally be treated if you were a prisoner? Back then, especially, it wouldn't be a good thing. Notice it says that they were bound. You see that? They were bound. What's that mean? All right, they're tied up. They're chained up. They're tied up. They're not doing anything. They're not walking around having a good time or socializing. They're all tied down, which means you have to sit there in your own muck and mire and just sit there in that prison. But look at this, verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of who? So he's given him favor in the sight of Potiphar. Now Potiphar's done with him, and look where God puts him, in a prison. Now you think that's kind of strange, that Joseph, being blessed of God in Potiphar's area, now Joseph is arrested and put in prison. Now I know the devil's behind the scenes trying to get Joseph just killed. It's obvious. He's trying to get him killed. But you see, God's providence is overruling the devil and putting Joseph exactly where he needed to be for the next round of blessings. And notice it says that God was watching over him. And it says, and he gave him favor with the prison keeper. All right? So the warden is pleased with Joseph. And it says, and the keeper of prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So everything Joseph did for the warden was blessed, and the warden liked that. He said, wow, I'm liking this. I don't have to do nothing. Everything's taken care of. Everything's done right. No problems. Well, that's good. And you see, Joseph was being blessed by God, and Joseph was being a blessing to others, and God was using Joseph in that prison for the next purpose. And you can see that, read on in chapter number 40, where the butcher and the baker both get put in prison, and Joseph has the ability of dreams. Remember, he had that before he got thrown into slavery, but he has been given the gift of dreams and visions, and he explains the bakers and the butchers dreams to them, and then they remember him when they come in to see the Pharaoh about this problem, that the Pharaoh's seen this vision, and of course Joseph comes and interprets that vision. But I want you to see, here's God moving in the hearts of these hardened people. Now, remember Potiphar, and remember this warden. They weren't really soft people, these Egyptians. They were hard people. It was a hard slavery. Remember, you can see all through the book of Exodus, or all through the book of Genesis, where they've been kept in slavery, and it's been an oppressive slavery. Remember, Pharaoh had ordered every one of those Jews that were born male to do what? Be killed by the housewives. Isn't it something to think about, how the housewives were ordered to kill the Jewish boys? Boy, that's something. That's hatred, isn't it? But Pharaoh was trying to wipe out the Israelites. Now, who does that sound like? That sounds like a devil. Okay, trying to wipe out the Israelites. But you see, let's go over to Exodus 2, and we'll come back to Genesis in a minute. Exodus 2. Remember Moses? Well, Moses was a young man during that time of the persecution of the young male children. Moses was a young baby, was born, and his mother hid him as long as she could. Then what did she do with him? She put him in an ark, right? In a basket. Pitched it within, and she put it in the river. And of course, you remember the Nile River. What's in the Nile River? You name it, it's in there. Crocodiles, snakes, hippopotamuses, all kinds of stuff in that Nile River. You think about that. Here's all of these critters are in there, and here's Mama putting her little baby in that river. Now, don't you think she's praying a little bit? Yeah. And you think about how, look at it, and it says, and the daughter of Pharaoh, verse 5, came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. Now, do you think that was by accident that the little ark rested right where she could see it in the reeds? That was no accident, was it? It was God's providence and God's hand leading that little basket over to the Pharaoh's daughter. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And what happened? She had compassion on him, and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. And the maid went and called the child's mother. Now you think about that. Here's Mama being called to be a nursemaid to her own child and getting paid for it. Isn't that a blessing to think about? How she had to put trust in God to take care of Moses. And Moses has in that little basket. Of course, when he got out of that basket, he started crying. And boy, that moved that Pharaoh's daughter's heart. And that was God moving on her heart to love on Moses and to keep Moses safe and to raise Moses up in the house of Pharaoh. You think about the difference there. You think about how God softened that Pharaoh's daughter's heart, and even softened Pharaoh, because you notice Moses got adopted into the family. Think about that. He softened even Pharaoh's heart, because what did Pharaoh promise to do to all the male-born children? Kill him. So you know he was softened by God to do exactly what God would have him to do, and that was to raise Moses until that time when Moses fled into the wilderness. So God has access to all the hearts of men, not just to the saved men, but God has access and is able to turn all the hearts of men. Remember Proverbs 26 and 1? Let's go there real quick. Proverbs 26 and 1. Is it 21 1. I'm sorry. Getting ahead of my mind here. Proverbs 21 1 says, the king's heart is where? Oh, what's that mean? The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. All right, look at the rest of it to explain it. As the rivers of water, he turneth it how? So who's in charge of that king's heart? God. I want you to see that. God is in control of whether it be a Christian king or a heathen king. God's still in control. And God can turn the hearts of men as he sees fit to, in his providence, to bring men to soften their hearts. I want you to go back to Genesis now. Go back to Genesis 32. Genesis 32. And I want you to remember the scene when everybody remembers Jacob and Esau, right? Genesis 32. Genesis 32. And go down, if you will, to verse number 4. Jacob here is meeting his brother Esau. And Esau had made a promise to Jacob, or to a general promise, that he was going to get vengeance upon Jacob for his trickery. Now, we all know how Jacob took and made his brother a red porridge, was it? That he loved, and he offered him that porridge in trade for his firstborn status. Okay, and then when it came time to distribute that firstborn status, Jacob pretended to be Esau because Isaac was blind, remember, from age. And he put on, his mama helped him and put on wool to pretend like he was hairy all over. So Isaac blessed Jacob with the blessing of the firstborn, thereby removing the blessing from Esau. So Esau has vowed vengeance now. And we see here where Jacob has met Esau now, and he is thinking about his promise about killing Esau. But what happened rather instead? What happened? Esau fell on his neck and kissed him and hugged him. You see, Jacob had sent his family in waves towards Esau. He'd sent cows and cattle and these things and said, these are for you and these are for you, trying to soften up Esau. But what would it take to soften Esau's heart? It'd take God, wouldn't it? God had to turn Esau's heart because Jacob had done what he'd done. God had to change Esau's heart in order for Jacob to survive. Because Jacob could have been slain by his brother right there. He didn't have a big army. Esau had a pretty good sized army at that time. But it's funny how that hatred built back up again with Esau's descendants. The Edomites is what they were called. Remember how they treated the children of Israel in the removal, in the captivity? Well, they were helping the enemy destroy Jerusalem. And they were capturing the Jews that had escaped from the city. They were capturing them and turning them in for a reward, no doubt. That just shows you how much of that animosity remained within them. But God changed the heart. And then remember, let me give you another one. Remember Elijah? Elijah, in the early part of his ministry, had told Israel that it wouldn't rain for a space of 3 years. Everybody remember that? Well, you stop and think about it. Over in Genesis 32, if you want to go there. No, it's not in Genesis 32. Forgive me. I'll be all right in just a minute here. But anyway, with Elijah prophesying that it would not rain and telling the heavens that it would not rain, then what happened was that the king, Ahab, everybody remember Ahab? Right? Who was he the husband of? Jezebel. Okay? He's the wicked consort of Jezebel, was enraged against Elijah and had told the heavens not to rain for 3.5 years, and it didn't, did it? Okay? God even told Elijah where to go hide during that time when it wasn't raining. So Ahab considered him the enemy of Israel and was searching all over the country for him and had sent armies out to try to capture him. And what happened every time they got to Elijah? They were struck down. They were struck down 3 times. And then finally, one of the prophets comes and said, "Don't kill me. The king wants to see you. Don't kill me." And of course, Elijah said, "You go and tell the king I'll meet him." But then when the king got there, it says that instead of killing the prophet, Ahab meekly obeyed Elijah's voice and gathered the people to Mount Carmel. And that's where they had that contest between who? Right, Baal and God. Remember, he got, and it's funny that the king obeyed him like it was his everyday friend, and he got everybody together and said, "We're going to have a contest, see who's God." And of course, God changed Ahab's mind. He could have had Elijah killed anyway, anyhow. He could have had 1,000 troops surround him and kill him, but that wasn't going to work. He'd already tried that, and God defeated those soldiers and allowed Elijah to defeat those soldiers. And then here's another one. Remember in the book of Esther. Everybody remember Queen Esther? Remember how she was challenged at one point to go in and to pray for the Jews, to go into the king and appeal to the king not to kill the Jews. And she went in, and what would happen if she went in uninvited? She could have been killed for violating the law of the king. But the king, it says, he held out his golden scepter and spared her, and she made her request known, and he spared the Jews. So you stop and think about how God can change different men in different ways and change their hearts of stone and help them to do what he needs to do. God has that sovereign power over all. And we've already looked at Proverbs 21:1, but let's look at Ezra chapter 1. Ezra. We're looking at Ezra and Nehemiah in our Sunday evening services. Ezra chapter 1, look at verses 1 and 2. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord what? Stirred up the spirit of Cyrus. See that? The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Well, now you think about it. Here's Cyrus, the king of Persia. Now, why in the world would he want to build a temple for God in Jerusalem? That's not natural, is it? No, he owned the whole world at that time, as it was. He owned the whole world. He was the boss. He was the top dog. In all of the earth, he was the king. But who stirred up his heart? God. You see, Cyrus and Ezra under Cyrus was ordered to go and begin building the temple back in Jerusalem. Now, 10 years later, here comes Nehemiah, and he starts building the walls and the city back again. But I want you to see how God can change hearts of men as he sees fit. God can change our hearts in the time that we live in today to do that which is right, to do what we should do. God can save us wonderfully, make us new creatures in him to do his will. And we shouldn't have to be forced or beaten or pushed to do his will. It should come natural to us to want to do the will of God. So as you think about how God is sovereign over all things, God is sovereign over your heart, He's sovereign over your neighbor's heart, over every single lost man's heart, and every single person on this planet. God can turn their heart. And thank God we can still have that opportunity to see hearts turned. God can still save people today, can he? Isn't that a great thing? God's still in the saving business even until today. God can still save and does save and will save until it's time for us to go home. Even then, though, when we leave here and the church is gone, there will be folks being saved under the ministry of the 144,000 plus 2. They'll be preaching the gospel. They'll be preaching Christ. People will be accepting Christ, refusing the mark of the beast. And what's going to happen to them? They're going to be slain for their testimony of the word of Christ. So here we are in a time that we live where God is changing people's hearts. He can move the heart of the king. He can move the heart of the Pharaoh. He can move the heart of the president. Let's pray towards that the Lord would move the hearts of men to accomplish his will and providence even today. Let's all stand.